Welcome to this deep dive. We're going to be looking closely at India's economic path today.
That's right.
Specifically, we're digging into a recent, quite insightful analysis.
Yes, there's a lot to unpack there.
And you're probably here because, like us, you want to understand that bigger picture, right?
Absolutely.
So our goal is really to pull out the key findings from this analysis.
And figure out what it actually means.
Exactly. What it means for you, especially if you're, maybe a retail investor trying to navigate things.
We'll try to keep the jargon light.
Yeah. Let's break down the concept simply. Aim for clarity.
Okay, so jumping right in. The first thing that really stands out is the growth forecast.
The GDP number.
Yeah, the GDP growth for India in 2025. The analysis has revised it slightly.
Okay.
It's now projected at 6.2%.
And what was it before? I remember seeing a slightly higher figure earlier.
It was, yes. The previous forecast, maybe from January, was 6.5%.
Ah, okay. So that's a downward shift.
A small one, yeah.
Yeah.
0.3 percentage points down.
Right. Small, but still a change. What's behind that revision? What are the main reasons?
Well, the analysis really points to increased friction in global trade.
Okay, trade tensions.
Yeah, and just a general climate of, global economic uncertainty. That seems to be the main drag.
And does it mention any specific factors?
It does, actually. It specifically highlights the impact of tariff policies from the United States.
Ah, the U.S. tariffs.
Yeah, those are seen as a significant contributor to this uncertainty.
Okay, so ripples from global trade definitely being felt.
Mm-hmm.
But even with this slight downward revision, the report still sounds somewhat positive about India overall.
Mm-hmm.
Or I'm reading that wrong.
No, you're absolutely right. That's a really key point. Despite the adjustment, the analysis stresses that India's growth outlook is considered relatively more stable.
Relatively stable compared to
many other major economies around the world.
Okay. And why is that? What's providing that stability?
A lot of it seems to come down to private consumption within India, domestic demand.
Right, people buying things.
Exactly. And interestingly, it specifically mentions strength in demand coming from rural areas.
Rural areas.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting. Usually the focus is urban.
It is. But this report kind of underscores a sustained resilience there, maybe linked to government support, maybe less direct impact from global trade shocks.
So it suggests the Indian growth story isn't just about the big cities.
Precisely. That rural demand seems to be a real anchor.
That is fascinating. So how does India's revised 6.2% stack up against the rest of the world then?
Well, if you look at the bigger picture, the global economy itself has seen more significant downward revisions.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the overall global growth forecast is now down to 2.8%.
Wow, okay. That's quite a drop. What about other big players like the U.S. or China?
They've also seen their forecast cut quite a bit. The U.S. is now projected at 1.8%.
1.8.
And China down to 4.0%.
Right, so India's 6.2%, even though revised down slightly, still looks pretty strong in comparison.
It does. Considerably stronger than those figures, yeah.
What's driving those bigger cuts for the U.S. and China then? Similar reasons.
Sort of. For China, the analysis does mention the implemented tariffs having a direct dampening effect.
Makes sense.
Even offsetting some positives like fiscal expansion. For the U.S., it seems more tied to that broader global uncertainty and, the fallout from trade tensions generally.
And just to clarify for everyone, when we talk GDP, gross domestic product.
Right, that's the total value of everything produced in a country, goods and services.
And trade impacts the net exports part of that calculation, right? Exports minus imports.
Exactly. So tariffs, trade barriers, they hit that component directly, which can lead to these downward revisions we're seeing.
It really shows how connected everything is, doesn't it?
Absolutely. One thing happens over here.
And it creates waves elsewhere.
Precisely. The term often used is spillover effects.
Spillover effects, right.
So even if India isn't the direct target of all the new tariffs, these global tensions can still impact its growth indirectly.
How so?
Through things like maybe lower demand for Indian exports if other economies slow down, or increased instability in global financial markets,
Got it. And it sounds like this uncertainty isn't expected to just vanish anytime soon.
No, not really. The analysis actually includes a word of caution about that.
Okay.
It warns that prolonged trade policy uncertainty could put more pressure on India's growth into the next fiscal year as well, FY27.
So further out.
Yeah. The projection for that year is currently 6.3%.
Which is also down slightly from before.
Also down slightly, yes, from an earlier 6.5%.
So, okay. We should probably brace for these global headwinds sticking around for a bit.
Seems prudent, yes.
Let's shift gears slightly. What about inflation? Something that hits everyone's wallet. What's the outlook there in India, according to this analysis?
On inflation, the news is actually more positive. The expectation is for it to moderate.
Moderate, okay.
Meaning it's expected to decrease. Consumer inflation is projected to fall to 4.2% in fiscal year 26, down from about 4.7% in the current fiscal year, FY25.
Okay, a noticeable drop.
And it's expected to cool even further, possibly down to 4.1% in fiscal year 27.
And just briefly, consumer inflation. That's basically the change in price for everyday stuff people buy, right?
Exactly. Your basket of goods and services, food, fuel, housing, clothing, the average price change over time. So lower inflation means prices aren't rising as fast.
That would definitely be welcome news for consumers.
No doubt. Helps with purchasing power.
Okay, so let's try and connect these dots. We've got slightly moderated growth, mainly due to global issues.
But still relatively stable growth.
Right, relatively stable,
Yeah.
underpinned by domestic demand, especially rural.
And moderating inflation on the horizon.
Yeah. So putting that all together,
Yeah.
what does this kind of economic picture suggest for, say, the average person thinking about investing? Any directives for retail investors?
That's $1 million question, isn't it? And it's crucial to start by saying, forecasts are forecasts, they change.
Always uncertain global events can throw a wrench in the works.
Absolutely. But based on this analysis, a few things stand out. First, even with the slight downgrade, India is still set to be one of the fastest growing major economies.
Potential opportunities remain.
It certainly suggests that. Continued opportunities within the Indian market seem likely.
Okay. And the inflation part, how does that play into investment decisions?
Well, lower inflation is generally good for consumers, boosts purchasing power over time.
Right.
It can also influence central bank decisions like interest rates. Lower rates can make borrowing cheaper for companies, potentially boosting certain investments while affecting returns on things like bonds. So investors need to watch that trend.
Got it. Monitor inflation and potential rate changes. What about the risks? You mentioned the trade tensions.
Yes, that's the big one. Those global trade tensions and policy uncertainty, they are significant risks.
Meaning volatility, ups and downs in the market.
Exactly. That potential for market volatility is higher in this environment, which really underscores the importance of diversification.
Don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Precisely. Spreading investments across different asset classes, maybe even different geographies, becomes even more critical to manage these global risks.
Makes sense.
Oh, yeah.
Anything specific sectors-wise, based on the report's findings?
Well, given the emphasis on private consumption, particularly rural demand as a support, investors might want to, pay attention to sectors that benefit directly from that, companies catering to domestic, maybe even rural consumers.
Okay, domestic consumption in place.
And also, the report mentions the need for structural reforms to sustain growth long term.
Reforms like?
Things like labor markets, education, financial policies. If the government focuses there, that could create long-term investment opportunities in related sectors. Think education tech, financial services, infrastructure maybe.
Interesting. So short-term focus on consumption, long-term on reforms. Potentially.
Could be one way to look at it, but the overriding message is really stay informed.
Keep your eyes open.
Yeah. Watch global economic news, policy changes, both here and abroad. Anything that could impact the Indian market. It's crucial for making, well-grounded decisions.
Okay, so let's try and sum up the key takeaways then. What should people remember from this deep dive?
I think the main point is the analysis shows a slight dip in India's growth forecast for 2025.
Down to 6.2%.
Mainly because of those global trade headwinds, especially involving U.S. tariffs.
But, and this is a big but.
But India's economy still looks relatively robust, relatively stable compared to others.
Supported by that strong internal demand, especially rural.
Right. So you have this kind of push and pull, global uncertainty acting as a headwind, but strong domestic demand providing a cushion.
And it really highlights how interconnected the world economy is. Spillovers are real.
Definitely. Events far away can have an impact right here. It underlines why monitoring global trade policies is so important for understanding India's prospects.
And for the investment climate, too.
Absolutely. So I guess the final insight is that while these forecasts give us a sense of direction,
they aren't destiny.
Exactly. Adaptability, staying informed, making careful decisions. That's key for navigating these uncertainties, both for the country and, for you as an individual investor.
Well said. Thank you for joining us for this in-depth look at India's growth story through the lens of this recent analysis.
My pleasure.
We really hope it's provided some valuable clarity and maybe some useful insights for you.
Hopefully. Yeah.
As you think about all this, maybe consider how these bigger global economic currents might influence your own views, your own decisions.
That's worth reflecting on.
And perhaps a final thought to leave you with. What are the potential long-term consequences of these shifts we're seeing in global trade, particularly for emerging economies like India?
That's a big question.
It is. Definitely something to keep thinking about.